This story began one early morning when a girl named Stella finally returned home. There she was, immediately met by her little sister. She ran up and hugged her, began to greet Mary, and asked if everything was okay with them while she was gone. But everything was going very well for them. The girl was able to cope with her task perfectly, and their dad was tired after the meeting, so they both rested. But Stella was very wary when she heard that their father was dating someone, so she decided that she definitely had to find out. After all, she didn't think that he had any acquaintances left. In fact, their family was the Ambrose family. These are people who made their living by selling mountain rock salt. This product has never been a terribly expensive pleasure for common people due to its limited quantity. But soon the price dropped sharply as roads were built throughout the empire and markets began to flourish. It was these changes that allowed sea salts to be sold at a lower price and in much larger quantities than rock salts. Perhaps the family of Stella and Eros could still be considered noble. However, they lost their partners because no one wanted to get involved with those who had absolutely nothing. So they had to work really hard in order to at least just survive. Stella also definitely wanted to find out who her father had seen since he was so tired after that meeting. She herself, after returning home from work, began to prepare breakfast for them. She cut potatoes, and at that moment realized that she was terribly tired of all this. But she had no time to relax because Sanderson, her younger brother, ran into the room and looked very worried. The guy didn't explain where he was. He just pointed to the newspaper and said that there had been a fire in the imperial family's summer mansion, and all the princes had died. Of course, this was very shocking for the girl, because there were 3 princes there. She could not believe that all of them could die at once. However, Sanderson said that the newspaper wrote that this grief bypassed one prince. It was obvious that this grief would shock the entire city, and all shops would have to be closed as a sign of mourning. And this was terrible because they already had practically no money, and if they closed the store, then not a single client would be able to come to them. Then Rosie brought only cabbage from the pantry. That was all they had left. The girl decided that the next day she would go to the market to do some proper shopping. However, their mother's illness worsened so much that they had to spend all their money to call a doctor. She kept thinking about what they would eat tomorrow and where she needed to go to earn more money and at least feed her family a little. Because of this, Stella often walked around looking sad. However, her brother also told her some good news, and the news was that the Duke of Rochester was coming to the capital. For the girl, this turned out to be truly wonderful news, because this man was her first love, Duke Killian Rochester, and it was really so. In a carriage on the approach to the city, a fair-haired man was riding. He was studying the newspaper in order to understand what was happening in the mountains. His assistant sat opposite him. It was very surprising for the guy that all the publishing houses had already published the news of the prince's death. He could not believe that rumors could spread so quickly. However, Killian did not want to talk about this because he had just lost 2 brothers, and so he changed the subject. The assistant also wanted to know if the guy would confirm the rumor that he was connected with Stella Ambrose, since this was already a well-known fact. However, people did not know officially whether this was true. However, the man did not want to have anything to do with her, because the little girl he had known all his life had grown up to be the most depraved woman in high society. That's why Killian considered it a shame and didn't even want to remember this person. But there were also rumors that this girl was being considered as a candidate for marriage with Killian. The man was certainly outraged. The guy didn't want to marry a slut like her, so he wanted to avoid similar rumors in the future by any means possible. However, at night, when he returned to the palace, he was immediately met by Dikla, his uncle on his mother's side, and he told Killian that it was time for him to get married. He was the emperor of this state and explained that this was inevitable because he became one of the heirs to the throne after the death of 2 other princes. Killian didn't like the fact that he had to obey his orders because he hadn't even chosen a wife for himself yet, and he didn't want to marry just anyone. However, it was even unpleasant for him to be near this man because he was an incredible manager who longed for the guy's death. So it was obvious that he was ready to do anything to achieve his goals. And in the end, the man found out that his uncle himself had prepared a wife for him. He certainly didn't like it. He didn't understand why his fate was being decided by someone else, essentially a stranger. He spent his time and effort to eventually settle on the table of the Embro with the main slut of high society. The guy could not believe that he was actually offered such an option. He didn't even understand why he couldn't just tell them that he was a threat to him, and that he didn't want to transfer his power to his nephew. Killian didn't see any point in continuing this dialogue, so he asked for forgiveness and said that he still had some tasks to complete, so he wanted to leave. But his uncle still asked the guy to stay, and said that he heard that this young lady had been in love with him for a very long time. Therefore, he would like the guy to treat her with kindness when they meet. At this point, Killian listened to all the rest of his conditions and ended the dialogue. When the next morning arrived, Stella got ready to go to the market quite early. Since all the shops were closed as a sign of mourning, she wanted to try to sell flowers for the prince's funeral, because she believed that this could bring them at least a little money. But her father was not thrilled with the idea because he still claimed that they had a high title and did not understand what people might think if they saw her in a high-status position selling flowers. For him, it was a real disaster, but Stella didn't understand why he started talking about it again. After all, for her, this status no longer meant anything, when it was not even possible to properly set the table. So for her, money was much more important than respect from people. Stella had a very bad relationship with her father, so she yelled at him and explained that he was completely ungrateful. After all, if she hadn't found such ways out of the situation, she would have been working underground a long time ago. This meant that Stella could become a real courtesan. Her father still had at least a little pride left, so he was even ready to reject her on the street. However, he would never allow his daughter to stoop to such a level. But Stella simply didn't see any other way out. Because last night they ate the last cabbage, she needed to earn at least a little money for this dinner, and so on. At that very moment, Rosie was eavesdropping on their conversation. In fact, the girl was unwell. However, she was afraid to say this because she knew that her sister was already having a hard time living without money. She soon ended the conversation with her father because she simply saw no point in continuing it further. She warned him that she would return soon and simply asked him not to imagine anything unnecessary. When the door closed, the man was very upset. He understood perfectly well that his daughter's life was already hard, but he couldn't do anything about it. And Stella considered herself an idiot. She didn't understand why she was so angry with her father all the time. After all, he had every right to be sad and angry, and she was constantly adding fuel to the fire. But in the end, she just decided to apologize to him when she got home. And for now, she needed to earn them some money. Several hours passed from that moment. Stella returned home late in the evening, but she was glad that she managed to sell all the flowers and earn at least a little money. After she pays the flower shop owner, she will of course have nothing left. But still, they will not go hungry during the period of mourning. When she started to approach her house, she suddenly saw a small flower that was lying on the ground. Stella picked it up and thought that she had dropped it when she was going to the market. It was a pleasant surprise. Stella hadn't thought about her first love's return to the city since last night. And besides, she didn't understand how her brother knew about it, because she didn't think her feelings were that obvious. She even thought about going to the funeral and paying her respects, and if she was lucky, she would be able to see the man at least from afar. When she returned home, Rosie immediately said this. However, for some reason, Rosie did not run to meet her. She went upstairs, thinking that she was sleeping. But I saw my sister in a terrible grave condition, lying on the bed, with steam literally coming out of her. She was all on fire. The girl had a high fever. Stella immediately wanted to go and call a doctor because her sister needed immediate treatment. But for some reason, Rosie grabbed her hand and asked her not to do it. She said that they had no money, so she didn't need to call anyone. Stella, hearing this, felt as if she had fallen into the ground. She could not believe that this was really happening, and that her little sister, who could have died because of this fever, was saying something like this. However, she told her sister that the owner of the flower shop allowed her to take all the proceeds from the sale of flowers. He was aware of their situation and therefore decided to help them. Of course, Stella didn't want to see her sister, who was very ill, worry about such a worthless thing as lack of money, so she just had to say something like that. Of course, Rosie thought that her little sister would not go to work the next day. After all, she wanted to bring the whole day with her. Of course, this couldn't happen, and I began to explain. I hope that tomorrow she will have to repay the owner of the flower shop for his kindness. In the end, my sister simply asked her to bring her something tasty. That would be enough. After this conversation, Stella brought a bucket of cold water and placed a special cloth on the girl's head so that her temperature would gradually drop. But as soon as she walked out the door, she was ready to just scream from the emotions she was experiencing. She needed money for medicine, but she didn't know where she could get it. The failure certainly couldn't calm down until it accumulated in several layers. And like no one else, she understood this perfectly well. So she expected more problems for herself. At the same time, her younger brother was looking for a job. After all, he believed that he also had to help somehow earn money. He felt his responsibility. Stella was very tired of her miserable life, and therefore she simply had no other choice except to do what she did best. She was going to push forward instead of running away from problems, even if it hurt her pride. Stella was going to go to work at night, of course. Sanderson did not understand what she meant, because he knew that there was no normal work at night, but he did not have time to stop his sister. After some time, the girl came to the right place. It was a dark alley, and she immediately smelled the scent of carnal pleasures. It was dangerous to be in that place at that time, unless you came for a specific purpose. There was passion in the air. Of course, this was not at all what Stella expected. She did not understand where the determination that burned within her when she left the house, leaving her sick sister, had gone. She didn't want to be in this place. She wanted to go back to her family. However, if she didn't do this, terrible things could happen to her sister. The girl couldn't even think about them. They had no money at all, so she was sure that it was possible to work in this alley as more than just a courtesan, so she was going to find out. She wanted to find other options if she begged hard enough. And then when she passed by a lady who was in your alley, this lady recognized her. She was very surprised. Her name was Lily. The woman immediately asked what she was doing in this place. The girl was worried that this was the worst place where she could run into her former maid. But nevertheless, Stella managed to do it. At that moment, she just wanted to fall into the ground. Because for her, it was a great humiliation when Several hours passed. She returned back home. The girl had to behave quietly because she thought that everyone was already asleep. But when she entered the kitchen, she saw that Sanderson was sitting at the table with a frightened look. When he saw his sister, he immediately ran up to her. He hugged the girl. Stella did not understand at all what had happened to him, because he had never hugged her so tightly in his life. This was truly unusual behavior for him. However, Sanderson said that when he saw that she was leaving so late, he immediately thought the worst. The girl smiled and asked him for forgiveness for making him worry so much. She explained that while looking for a part-time job, she came across Lily. They started talking, and the girl even offered her a pretty good job, so she couldn't refuse. Sanderson couldn't believe that Stella had to be a servant now. He could easily become a shoe shiner. However, he would never have imagined his sister in the role of a servant. But the girl tried to calm him down. She said that he was just a child and adults should work, so he shouldn't even think about anything like that. She could figure it out completely, so he didn't need to worry, and she sent him to bed. Sanderson was very upset that he was too little to help his sister and to prevent her from running away in the middle of the night. He wanted to become an adult in order to solve several problems with his sister. Because of this, he was very upset because he wanted to help her with all his heart. Again, he hugged Stella tightly and told her that he would definitely grow up soon and work very hard so that she would not need anything. They talked for a while longer and then went to bed together. Stella woke up with the sunrise. She was incredibly happy that Lilia was able to find her a job, but she decided not to tell Sanders that it was a social club. She just didn't want to bother him anymore. Lilia said that the girls would only need to work in the kitchen, so everything should be fine. She wouldn't be exposed to any danger. The first thing she did before her main job was to go and pay her respects to the princes. So the girl went out to the square and saw that there was not a single soul there yet. Benches had been prepared in advance, and there were 2 coffins. The girl assumed that it was still too early, but decided that this would actually play into her hands. In general, she could calmly approach the princes. She laid down her 1 flower and prayed for them. But at that moment, Akilyan approached her from behind. He saw a girl praying and could not take his eyes off his old friend. She had become even more beautiful than even he remembered. When Stella felt that someone approached her, she was very surprised because she thought that she was alone. But when she saw who exactly it was, the girl was ready to scream in surprise. It was the Duke of Roadster. He also put the bouquet next to hers and simply turned around and walked away quickly. She assumed that he was most likely not in the mood, but she also thought that perhaps she smelled wrong somehow, which was why he was disgusted. But when she sniffed herself, she didn't notice anything unusual. Keelan didn't even stop or turn around. He just walked. Stella still couldn't understand why he looked at her as if she were some kind of pest. This really offended her, but the man only confirmed the theory he had built, and because of this, he was even angrier. In fact, quite recently, when he was heading to the city, his assistant told him about a rumor about Stella. Her uncle was talking about how their marriage was already confirmed. Killian was certainly used to all sorts of rumors about himself. However, this one crossed all boundaries. But this rumor also said that even the ardent Duke of Rochester, who had survived years of military service, could not resist when Lady Stella took off her clothes and threw herself into his arms. This rumor really outraged the man. He really couldn't believe that something like this was spreading among society. That same evening, he went to a rather strange place. He had never been to such an establishment before. He also had a strange feeling when he heard its name. It was no different from an underground steam room, even though it was called a social club. When Killian walked inside, he was greeted by a rather tense atmosphere. The atmosphere around him was filled with the smell of wine and very cheap cigars, and also smelled of excited bodies. There he was immediately met by Egbert, who greeted the Duke and said that he was very glad that he had come to decorate the rich place with his presence. It was a dark-haired young man. He was holding a cigar in his hands, and the Duke, looking around, did not seem at all pleased. And if he knew what kind of place this was, he wouldn't even have set foot on the threshold. Egbert tried to calm him down. He said that most of the establishments were closed due to mourning, but offered him to sit down and talk. He also offered him a cigar. The man did not refuse. The guy said that it was time to confess the reason for such a sudden decision to join the army, and he wanted to hear it personally from the Duke. But for Killian, it was all obvious. Of course, he went there because a lot of problems had arisen. Their conversation eventually went in a different direction, and they were already talking about his fiancée, Lady Stella Emrose. The man really sympathized with the Duke because all this was pinned on him. He also told gossip that he knew that in order to raise his family from its knees after failures, she walked the streets at night exposing her cleavage. He told a few more rumors about who exactly she had refused, and the man could not believe that the girl really was so beautiful. After all, these guys would definitely not even look in her direction. However, Killian agreed and said that she was irritatingly beautiful, and that irritated him even more. That evening, the Duke also learned that he was expected to have not only a wife, but also a child, since his uncle expected that they would have children quite quickly. Of course, Stella was not aware of these rumors. She stood in the kitchen on the night shift and washed dishes, as this was part of her duties. The girl kept wondering why the man's eyes were filled with contempt that day. She assumed that she had done something wrong, but she still couldn't understand. Well, after the girl ran out of dishes, the waiter came and called her to help in the room. And all because, due to the mourning, there were so many visitors that the waiters simply could not cope, so they needed any possible help. Stella was very scared when she heard that she had to pour drinks, because she even worked under a false name to hide the fact that she was a noblewoman. And of course, with her appearance, she should not have appeared in the hall so that she would not be recognized. When she tried to explain to the man that she couldn't do this, the waiter just angrily yelled at her and couldn't believe that she didn't want to help her colleagues at such a time, and also advised her to work harder to avoid getting fired. The girl was shocked. She never thought that if she did her job poorly, it could have an impact on the situation. But now this realization came to her. The girl was trying her best to help with Tally, so she couldn't cause her any trouble. So she agreed to do it. In the end, she tidied herself up and went out into the hall. The girl madly hoped that no one would recognize her, because if this was not the case, it would be a great humiliation for her. But then suddenly, when she was heading to one of the tables, someone called her by name. This voice seemed very familiar to her. She immediately turned around to check whether it was by any chance the Duke of Rochester. Turning around, she realized that it wasn't her they were calling, but they were talking about her. But the girl was right. She saw a man, and they asked him if he wanted to take her as his wife. The guys who surrounded him immediately answered for him. They thought that, of course, there couldn't be any questions. He definitely wanted it. They even started offering him the option that he could sell her for a small amount, because she was quite famous for being good in bed, so many would want her. Stella, having heard all this, could not believe that they were spreading such terrible rumors about her. She did not even understand where they could have come from. She had been a member of your society for many years, so she couldn't believe that people hadn't forgotten about her and continued to come up with such obscenities. Killian, answering in her question, said that someone like her was unworthy of even standing next to him, so of course he would not have taken such a girl from his wife. The guys laughed and continued to discuss something. She just froze in place. She couldn't believe that she had to hear such disgusting things. In the end, she just started running back into the kitchen. The girl didn't even notice the guy who was walking straight towards her and accidentally knocked over the wine. All this time, Stella just admired him from afar and didn't even dare to dream about being near him at all, let alone getting married. The girl knew better than anyone else that it was not worthy to be near him, so she did not understand why he even thought that she would even want something like that. When she crashed into the car, she fell and hit herself pretty hard because of the pain. Her eyes started to water. She didn't want to cry, but she couldn't help herself. A young man approached her. She heard a velvety voice that sounded on her and could not believe that it made her feel even more pathetic. Of course, this man was Killer. He became interested in the girl and asked if she had accidentally hit herself and also wanted to help her get up. She was sitting with her back to him, so he couldn't see who it was. And Stella just wanted to fall through the ground at that moment so as not to experience this shame. The girl turned around a little and said that everything was fine with her. The guys immediately started asking why he stood up abruptly and thought that it was his fault. However, Kylan explained that this was not the case. He took a gold coin out of his pocket and explained that he just wanted to help her because he felt very sorry for this girl. He sprinkled a few gold coins around her and said that she probably now had expenses for alcohol or drugs, so he gave her the required amount to cover it. Stella tried to calm herself down and said that everything was fine and it was not humiliating. However, she still took one gold coin in her hand, which was bloody from the blow. Killian had already turned around in the meantime. He wanted to return to the conversation because he thought they were discussing something important for him. Humiliating the girl behind her back was a very pleasant conversation. When he had moved far enough away, she felt relief. Now she could call a doctor for her sister, and perhaps even this money would be enough for medicine for her mother. So, everything was fine. The Duke was right. So she got up and wanted to collect these coins and go back to the kitchen to wipe the blood off her hands. For the purpose, she really needed all his pity down to the last drop. It was equally true that she deserved it, and therefore the girl accepted this pity even without any extra feelings. So she simply forced a smile onto her tear-stained face and apologized to the waiter, asking if she could just continue her work in the kitchen. Meanwhile, she had already collected all the coins, after which the man, of course, did not object and sent her back. When Keelan returned to talking with the guys, he still couldn't get the girl's fake name, Laura, out of his head. He assumed that this was her underground pseudonym. However, he believed that this name definitely did not suit her. He believed that she was really trying to seduce him from afar, and this made him feel a little sick. The man didn't understand what right he had to make such a face. Of course, he recognized this lady. It was an empress, but he still couldn't get her out of his head. Then the conversation turned to investing. They heard that the Rochester family was planning to do so in the recently opened sea route. The man couldn't believe that they were actually interested in something like this. He didn't understand what they were talking about and why they were discussing it. However, he said that it was supposed to be a secret project, but rumors had already spread everywhere, so he confirmed the information that he wanted to make investments in that area of activity. But the guy still couldn't understand why he had to be open and talk about it while he was surrounded by idiots who were unworthy of his attention. Nevertheless, he spent more than 1 hour there when it was already completely dark outside. Stella finally returned home. Her hand was bandaged because she was really badly cut. Even though it was very difficult for her to get this job, she was still fired. Because of this, she returned home in tears, but at least she had those gold coins that the man arrogantly threw at her feet. She kept going over in her head the words the man had said about her being unworthy, and she felt incredibly ashamed of it. I just wanted to run away from this city and start a new life. But of course she couldn't do that. If she leaves, terrible things will happen to her younger brother and sister. What thoughts were still running through her head? She was very tired of all this, and she just wanted to rest. When she finally got home, she decided to go to bed early because tomorrow she would have to leave even earlier and go look for her new job. But when Stella entered the kitchen, she saw the announcements that Sanderson was studying on the table. There she saw a rather attractive vacancy in some mansion. The governor required housing and food, but only women were needed. Stella was very happy to see this vacancy because it was ideal for her. And besides, her status as a noblewoman could play a good role in all this. As soon as she leaves the capital, the rumors will immediately disappear. She could not believe that everyone called her the main courtesan in high society, because this was the most real absurdity. The next morning, Stella announced her desire to become a governess. Of course, her father was furious. He was still worried about what people would say when they found out about it. Well, the girl advised him to just look at the world more realistically. They were on the brink of poverty and needed to get money for their mother's treatment. So they simply had no other choice. The man wanted to object, but he realized that Stella was right. The job of a governess was not much different from that of a housekeeper, and this still bothered him. As her father, he couldn't sit back and watch her suffer in such a grueling job, but he didn't know if he could or could somehow resist it. And then an idea came to his mind on how he could fix all this. He asked Stella not to rush with this work and said that he would definitely help them. In fact, his idea was disgusting because he had to sign a contract with his brother about selling, essentially, his daughter. He always considered Stella to be narrow-minded. The girl did not realize that her value was falling with every minute. And besides, she had no one to blame except her own father, who himself understood all this perfectly well. On her father's advice, Stella did not go to that job. She stayed until early in the morning that day. Being next to her little sister, who was still sick, her temperature still did not go down, and father ran away early in the morning. Then Sanderson came and said that he had already returned and wanted to see Stella. The girl, of course, immediately came down. He suddenly left, saying that he would decide everything himself and did not appear at home for several days. Of course, this alarmed her. She was wondering where he had been when his youngest daughter was bedridden. So, going downstairs, the first thing she did was ask where he had been all this time. But when she went down, she saw her Uncle Wigel and was very surprised. After all, they were holding some kind of contract in their hands, and her father was sitting opposite her. The red-haired man with blue eyes saw Stella and smiled and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. And when the girl asked what exactly had brought him so far, he replied that her father had told her everything. He had heard that she was going to go and work as a governess. However, the man believed that her father would be very worried about this, and that is why he was there to offer a solution that would help get rid of all the problems. It was then that he pointed to the contract that he brought with him. Stella did not understand what he was talking about, but immediately read what was written on the paper. Her hands began to tremble. It spoke of a mansion in the capital, fully paid tuition, a private doctor, and a monthly pension. She immediately asked her uncle what it was all about, because it looked very suspicious. Her father said that this was the only way he could protect her, and that is why he did this. Of course, Stella didn't like all this. She didn't understand how the contract could contribute to this, since she was essentially collateral. The girl started to swear at her father very loudly and did not understand. However, her uncle replied that there was a misunderstanding, so he decided to explain everything to them. He looked at his niece and said that 2 princes had recently died, and the culprit was to be executed for the confiscation of his property. It turned out that his property also contained a salt mountain, which was put up for auction. There was definitely time to buy it at the lowest price. The body could not believe that her father had decided to buy some mountain in such a brutal manner when the sea had been completely open and freely accessible all this time. Tears appeared in her eyes. She did not understand how her father could have suffered such a betrayal. Her uncle tried to calm her down and said that she was deeply mistaken in her judgments. The man said that she knew that her father would never harm her. It was simply her chance to become the Duchess of Rochester, which she should have taken advantage of. He said that she would marry Duke Killian, and then everything would work out. Well, the girl couldn't get his words out of her head when he said that she wasn't worthy of standing even with him. Stella looked at her uncle and asked what he was talking about, because the man was probably crazy to agree to take someone like her as a wife. But the man, taking back his contract, replied that the Duke was indeed going to marry her. It was the emperor's decree, so she didn't have to worry about it. That same evening, Kilian actually received a decree from the emperor and could not believe that the man wanted to marry him to Stella so much that he even resorted to such methods. But he was absolutely sure that this man was insisting on marriage only to mock him. He would very much like to refuse if he could do so. But in what case would the emperor have started to bombard him with even more problematic women, so he simply had no choice. He had to marry Embru, because it was the best of all evils. The girl saw no point in discussing this with her father anymore, so she called a doctor to examine her sister. After the man did this, Stella was happy. After all, she had a common cold, but her immune system was still weakened. There were also signs of malnutrition, but if she starts eating properly, she will soon begin to feel better. Stella was well aware of all these problems, but she did not know how they could be solved. She could have easily fixed it with regular nutritional medication, but she simply didn't have the money for it. Then suddenly, her brother ran into her room. He showed off the shirt that his uncle had given him. The girl, of course, gave him many compliments, but the boy also said that his uncle asked him to tell her that he was waiting for her on the first floor and asked her to come down quickly. Stella was, of course, upset to hear this. However, she told her uncle that she was already on her way. As a result, less than a week passed from the moment the contract was signed. Since then, their life has truly changed for the better, and they have not had any problems. Stella's newfound wealth in the series gave her hope that she had heard that the Duke was positive about the idea of marriage. So when he came to see her, she hoped for the best. But the girl was still a little worried because Kilian had come to visit his bride. She believed that perhaps he did not believe those ridiculous rumors about her and sincerely wanted to see her, at least this time. Hope settled in her heart. The Duke even gave the girl an incredibly large number of different gifts, which made her feel awkward. Stella was very ashamed. She didn't understand how she dared to assume that the Duke would come to this place in person. Of course, he simply handed over his gifts and that's all. But she began to blame herself for complaining that he had not come in person when the Duke had been so generous to her. She decided to immediately open a number of gifts to see what exactly he had given. In one of them, there was a beautiful green dress. She thought about the fact that perhaps he could collect these gifts himself. If this is so, then he showed a lot of attention and care. But then they brought her a huge basket with a bouquet. There was also a note. This was also from her sir. Stella could not believe her eyes. She had never seen such gorgeous flowers before. But when she opened the note, she saw that he had written there that he was looking forward to it. Of course, Stella could not at first believe that the Duke could expect their marriage. But now in her soul, there appeared hope that this could really be so. She might have regretted her decision to look forward to this marriage so much. But at that moment, she was happy, and that was enough for her. However, her uncle approached the butler, who was handing over all these things, and asked why he himself had not come, because it was somehow strange. They explained to him that he simply did not want to take them by surprise with his unexpected visit. Therefore, he decided to come after the gifts were delivered. Hearing this, Stella immediately understood that this meant that the Duke was on his way. But even despite her excitement and heart fluttering, she was still happy that he would come. In the end, she decided to tidy herself up and change her clothes so that he would not be disappointed with the picture he saw in front of him. She decided that it would be good if he saw her in the dress he gave her, so she opened a few more boxes and found there a lot of different jewelry and other outfits. Stella settled on that beautiful green dress. She also put on a hoop and beautiful silver earrings. She now looked amazing. Her uncle complimented her, but she still hoped that the Duke would like it. The girl was very unsure of herself, and this disappointed his uncle, because not every man would love such a timid woman. On the day when Keelan showed pity and threw gold coins at her, she clearly heard his voice. He laughed with his friends and called her a high society prostitute and said that she was unworthy of even breathing next to him. But she still considered the Duke a wise man, and from his actions, she understood that he realized that something was wrong and independently studied this whole issue. So she believed that he probably came to the conclusion that all these rumors were wrong. You saw a man standing next to the gate, and it was worth going closer to check who it was. She thought it was because it could be the Duke, but when she came closer, she saw that it was some stranger. The man was wearing a black cloak and hat. He grabbed her hand and said that of course they knew each other. He called her a stupid girl since she didn't understand the obvious. He said in an indignant voice that she had gladly taken the clothes and jewelry he had bought her, and now had the audacity to ask who he was for her sake. He had even broken off his engagement, so he could not believe that she had actually said such a thing. Stella was very worried. Her uncle was standing nearby. However, for some reason, he did not come to help her. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. She was in real danger. The man continued to yell at her. He accused her of crimes that she had not even heard. The girl said in a trembling voice that he probably confused her with someone else, and therefore accused her of something she did not do. But when the man heard this, his nerves were already at the limit. He swung at Stella and called her terrible words. The girl simply fell. She expected a blow. But it never happened. She immediately opened her eyes to see what was happening there. And then she saw that the Duke stopped the hand of this insane man and asked in a calm voice what was going on between them. When this guy saw this girl's fiancé, he advised him to stay away from her because she was a terrible slut. At first, she acted like an innocent virgin, but then her true nature came out. The girl couldn't believe that she had to hear all these false accusations against her, but after what happened, she couldn't even move. Her heart was beating too fast. The voices became very distant. Her head started to spin. She felt as if she was not there. She really felt very bad. When the Duke looked at her, he realized that nothing good would come of it if things continued. So he thanked the man and advised him to leave. But before that, Killian grabbed his shirt and said that this advice was terrible, and he himself did not like it when people like him taught him how to live. Then the girl's uncle intervened in their argument. He believed that there had been a misunderstanding, so he offered to settle everything. He also asked the Duke to check on Stella because she looked worried. The man, of course, did not believe that it was a misunderstanding. However, he knew that the girl was ill, so he came closer to her, looked her straight in the eyes, and said that he had come to talk to her. However, as soon as he entered the estate, a very interesting scene with a girl in the lead role took place before his eyes, so he would like to hear the details from her. Of course, she said that it was all a mistake, and she had no idea who this man was. So she thought that he just confused her with some other person, and that's all. She finally got to her feet and asked if she would have allowed something like this to happen on such an important day. She swore that she knew nothing and continued to cry, although she didn't even want to. Emotions simply got the better of her. The man said that he was told that with the help of her pretty face, she bewitched many men along the way. The first thing she heard was a cold, monotonous voice. He ordered her to get rid of all intrigues before their wedding. In the end, she realized from his chilling gaze that the happy marriage she dreamed of would never happen. She would never be able to escape the prison called life. She would never leave this hell. Stella was simply doomed. Ultimately, after that meeting with the Duke, she did not see him again. But preparations for the wedding continued. And when the momentous day finally arrived, a great many different guests gathered on the terrace. The father asked not to disturb her. He just looked at her and left. The guy did not object because he just wanted to say hello to her and not disturb her anymore. At that moment, rumors began to spread at the speed of light. People who came to this event were not even embarrassed in the presence of Stella's father. They said terrible things behind his back and laughed. They were evil and unfounded, as always. And the girl, even when she heard them, was not at all surprised, because only something like this was to be expected from this situation. Deep down, her father wanted to tell them everything and show them that it was not true, but he considered it a useless exercise. Meanwhile, Sanderson had already arrived at the bride's room. Stella was completely ready. She was wearing a beautiful cream wedding dress and holding the bride's bouquet in her hands. She was very happy to see her brother, but then the guy suddenly asked in a serious voice if she was happy. The girl certainly didn't expect such a question from him. However, the guy explained why he came to this conclusion. Everyone was saying that this man didn't deserve her, so he thought that it must have been very painful for her to hear something like that. As soon as Sanderson took her hands, he burst into tears and asked her to run. He was ready to take care of all the consequences. Even though he was perfectly aware of the fact that their life would turn into something without her, he wanted his sister to have the happiness she deserved. But of course, Stella couldn't do that. She replied that everything was fine with her, and he didn't have to worry. It wasn't a problem for him at all. After this, Sanderson left and took his place, and Stella began to be led out by the hand by her father, who simply sold the girl. It was an absolutely ridiculous wedding ceremony that absolutely everyone present did not like. The girl could not even hold back her tears. People thought that she was overjoyed, but no one knew the truth except the video itself. The Duke took her hand, and the reality of the whole situation suddenly hit Stella completely. The priest began the ceremony, and she couldn't even look the man straight in the eyes. In the end, they swore what was necessary and now had to seal their promises with a kiss. The man took off her veil and ran his finger over her lips, after which he moved and kissed her. People immediately began to applaud, but there were those in the hall who of course did not like this. And even after such a touching event, they began to talk behind the back of one of these ladies, Madame Rochester. She sat with a stony face and just looked straight ahead. It was clear that the girl did not like the ceremony at all. After the kiss, the Duke said in a quiet voice that she should stop being sad. He would not console her if she cried. Therefore, she had no need to waste her nerves. Stella, as always, managed to put a smile on her face, although she didn't like it that way. Several hours passed, and their ceremony was over. The girl sat in her nightgown in her room, and was incredibly bet she could not even imagine that a wedding could be so exhausting. She would have really liked to go and get some sleep, but she couldn't do it because she was waiting for the Duke with whom their wedding night awaited them. When the man came to her room, he was wearing only a robe. Stella greeted him, but Qilin asked him to immediately discard all these ridiculous formalities. He wanted her to be comfortable, but Stella didn't understand how that could even be possible at that moment. After the wedding ceremony, the Duke's assistant came to her with documents in his hands that described her role as the Duchess. She had to sign it because it also described the points regarding the divorce. It was supposed to take place after 3 years of marriage. During the marriage, it was not allowed to enter into relationships with other members of the male sex. During the marriage, Stella will receive several gold coins to maintain her dignity. After the divorce, she will be provided with land, an estate in the Melvin region, and monthly payments. The only thing he asked for in return was non-disclosure. Of course, she had to sign it because it was a really good agreement that was beneficial only to her. So before they got down to business on their wedding night, Stella wanted to talk to the man specifically about this contract. However, Qilin came closer to her and asked what her goal was, what she needed from him, since she was ready to do anything just to seduce him. Stella couldn't believe that he actually said something like that. She began to swear that she hadn't even thought about it, but as he came closer to her, she stepped back and fell onto the bed. The man ran his finger over her lips again. He called her darling and said that he heard that she was so desperately looking for him. Stella explained that she was simply thinking about what could be added to their marriage contract to make it more beneficial for everyone. But at that moment, the man began to pass another one on her E and rose higher and higher. He said that in the agreement, there was not a word about the heirs, but he was ready to add 1 point to this agreement. However, first he wanted to check whether they were even capable of conceiving a child. Stella, upon hearing this, was incredibly shocked. She had not expected this at all. The girl covered herself with her hands. She said that they hadn't yet reviewed the contract, so she didn't want to rush anything. But the man warned her in a quiet voice that if she was going to use this as an excuse to run away, it would be better not to provoke him. After these words, he passionately kissed her. Stella couldn't even breathe at that moment. However, he was very persistent and still continued to do it. The last long kisses. He put her on her feet and said that since such actions frightened her, she was definitely not ready for a child yet. He picked her up and asked if it was part of Stella's bad weather. She grabbed him with 6 arms. She was scared and confused, but asked him to let her go because she could walk on her own. He put her back on this bed and asked his assistant to review the contract so that she would have to reread it and sign it again. After that, he simply turned around and left, wishing her good night. Stella could not believe that she was now a duchess, and also that he really saw that she was uncomfortable and left her alone. The man, meanwhile, returned to his office, where he was met by his relatives. He was the crown prince when he saw him. He was very surprised because the man at this time should have been enjoying his first wedding night. He asked the guy why he had secretly snuck into the palace at such a late hour. He had a glass of champagne in his hands and was already getting ready for bed. But Qilin explained that he simply couldn't be in the same house with his treacherous bride. Her face was simply terrible. She looked at him as if she had never had a man next to her before. He wouldn't want anyone else to see that look, But still, the man suspected her of many different crimes, so he considered her a real fox. Rodney then asked him if he really thought that Stella was a spy for His Majesty the Emperor. The man didn't know. He probably didn't even have proof. However, he was absolutely sure of it. He didn't see any other reasons for her to marry him. They also talked about her regarding Stella, and the man suggested not to resist, at least until a certain time. After all, if he opens up to her, she will immediately inform the Emperor about it. So he suggested that the guy try to seduce her first, because love pushed people to very stupid actions. Killian, hearing this excellent idea, was delighted, because it had never even occurred to him. However, it was quite good, but he was already starting to get tired of her feigned naivety, so he would like to bring her to clean water. Stella had a pretty peaceful night, despite the fact that she couldn't sleep for half the night because of what happened in the evening. She woke up quite early. The bed was very comfortable, so even despite the small number of hours she slept well. A maid knocked on her door. She said that the Duke would like to have breakfast with her, so she had to wake up and get ready for it. The maid didn't even come into the room to inform her about it, but in the end, she changed her clothes and went down for breakfast. The food there was incredible. Stella had never seen such a wide variety of delicious dishes. Then suddenly the man turned to her. However, he didn't call her by her name or somehow else. He called her dear. Because of this, the girl even blushed completely. She asked again what he said, because she thought that she just imagined it. But it was really so. He wanted to ask if the girl had plans for this day, because he would spend the whole day at the estate. Stella was very confused by the fact that he called her darling, so she did not immediately understand what he wanted from her. Lowering her head down, she explained that she would spend the whole day here. The man tried to somehow lighten the atmosphere and really make contact with her, so he suggested inviting friends to their estate for tea. He was completely not against it. Of course, Stella couldn't do this because she simply didn't have any friends. She worked all the time, so she was never able to find any. The man decided to take this advice that he heard the previous night, so he turned to his wife and asked for forgiveness for being a little harsh last night. He just thought that the girl would refuse to sign the contract and would insist on staying in this place forever. However, he was told that she did this last night, so now he is calm. He also suggested that they get along because they would now have to be inseparable for 3 years. When Stella heard this, she doubted it. The girl wasn't sure whether his thoughts matched his words, but she still said that she would try her best not to disgrace him. He also told the girl that her uncle would like to visit her and asked if she wanted this. When Stella heard this, she was very surprised because her uncle had not warned her about this visit, and because of this, she immediately became wary. Of course, first she would like to meet her close brother, sister, and father. However, since her uncle insisted, she agreed and said that if Killian was not against it, then she was all for it. In fact, the reason he suspected Stella of being a spy was because Vigil Emrys was nicknamed the Emperor Dog. And since Stella was his niece, he was absolutely sure that her sweet smile was just a mask that she put on in public. And she even had the audacity to pretend that she didn't know anything about it. Of course, Kylan thought that this feigned answer of hers showed that she didn't even allow the thought of coming up with some kind of excuse. So the man decided to play along with her and smiled. He said that she was now the mistress of this house, so she could do as she wished. But he also said that it was necessary to prepare well in advance for her uncle's arrival. He wanted to do this because he couldn't allow his new wife to overwork herself, so he suggested that she take care of all the preparations herself. For him, it wasn't difficult. Stella began to object to me. She believed that since he had decided to take this initiative upon himself, she did not want to interfere. The man, meanwhile, was going to check on her. He knew that, according to rumors, she was crazy about expensive jewelry, so he wanted to see if she could maintain her innocent smile when she saw in front of her the dazzling jewels that he would prepare in advance. That same day, they went into the city, and the man, like a true gentleman, came out and offered her his hand. Smiling, Killian also told her to rely on him because she was so small that he could lose her if she fell. The girl didn't understand at all why he was talking about this, but they headed to the store where the owner immediately met them. She was going to take them to a special room so that no one would disturb her, but Killian, from the threshold, walked a short distance with her and asked if they had what he asked for. The store owner immediately said that everything was prepared. Stella, meanwhile, stood to the side, feeling completely uncomfortable, as if she were out of place in this place. After all, just yesterday, he looked at her with the utmost contempt, but now he treated her so kindly that at the moment it seemed to her that they were just two different people. This is because it is impossible that just one signature could change his relationship so dramatically. Stella also believed that he might want to extract some benefit from her that she did not know about, and that could even harm her. Then suddenly, a man came up to her. He grabbed her around the waist and took her hand. In a gentle voice, he told her to focus on him because he was a terribly jealous man. Stella asked him to do all this when they were alone because she was not very comfortable doing it in front of everyone. She really felt terrible. Stella understood that it made no difference what use she was to him. She would simply do what she was paid for and become the sophisticated wife that the Duke wanted her to be for his own good. Then the lady led them out, and the man looked with disdain at the two ladies who were sitting in the room and discussing Stella right in front of everyone. Meanwhile, in her estate, Killian's mother heard the latest news that his lordship had sent an invitation to Vigil Emrys. Of course, the woman was very disappointed in this. Stella invited her uncle before her own mother-in-law, so she believed that the girl would still have a lot to learn, and she was going to take charge of her upbringing with her own hands. Meanwhile, Stella went upstairs. There they were surrounded by a multitude of precious outfits and decorations. Her eyes were simply running wild, but she felt awkward, although Killian, seeing her reaction, thought that since she sighed so much at the decorations, he thought that she liked all of it. He took her hand and asked what had caught her eye. He also warned her that she could point to anything and it would immediately become the girl's property. Stella immediately began to refuse. She, of course, said that the gifts he gave before the wedding were quite sufficient and she did not need anything else. She removed her small, delicate hand from his large, rough palm and said that she simply didn't want to be a burden to him. Killian certainly didn't expect such a turn of events. His cheeks turned red and he became embarrassed. The man really didn't expect the girl to be so stubborn. He thought that she would begin to live up to her reputation as a dissolute and oligarchic woman, but in the end, she turned out to be much more cunning and decided to play a different role. Instead of begging him to buy something, she refuses, making him want to start spoiling her. So he didn't understand what game the girl was starting, but he definitely wanted to bring her to clean water. Stella said that she would do everything that was required of her, so he was not obliged to treat her too well. The man was very impressed by her behavior. For some reason, he felt very sorry for her, and he wanted to start caring for her. He couldn't even believe that he could actually fall for such an obvious trick. Stella took him by the hands, looked the man straight in the eyes, and noticed that he had turned very red. The girl asked in an alarmed voice if he had really become ill. The man, of course, pulled his hands away. He already felt very awkward, and this only made the situation worse. He didn't even answer. The girl apologized and said that next time she would definitely be careful. The man understood that she did not want to harm him, at least at that moment, so he said that she just scared him a little. She asked him in a trembling voice if he would like to come home, since he was not feeling well. She thought that it would be the right thing to do. He couldn't believe that after lightly pushing her, the girl became so scared that she started shaking. He even thought that she was like cotton candy, and the wind would blow and carry her away. But the more these thoughts filled his brain, the more embarrassed he became. Or she said that everything was fine. He just didn't know how husbands behave, and because of this, he was a little confused. Now he understood what exactly the emperor wanted to do. He intended to make him helpless before the beauty of Stella, and he was really good at it. But the man tried to regain his composure. He told the girl to let her continue helping him. After all, it would be much easier for him that way. Stella wasn't against it. On the contrary, she believed that it could help them, and the man was glad to see that she was vulnerable. He believed that her vulnerability could bring the girl to justice. The man moved closer to her, and in a quiet, erotic voice, he said that he really couldn't stop thinking about how rude he had been to her on their last night. He would be glad if she allowed him to correct himself. In fact, Killian believed that spreading rumors that he was head over heels in love with his wife was a good treasure. And that is exactly what he did. The girl was very embarrassed and immediately told them to close this conversation, because she herself was not at all against it. Over time, everything became even more awkward. Stella was very embarrassed. She really was very innocent. and when the man touched her, her whole body trembled with fear and unknown feelings. Killian was very irritated because he thought that it was all a show. In the end, he asked how they could conceive a child if she was scared when he touched her neck. The man began to openly harass her. He put the girl on her back and towered over her. Stella continued to push him away from herself, because in such a place there was definitely no need to do such a thing. And at that moment, the owner of the store returned to the room and brought what the man had asked for. However, when she saw them in that position, she suddenly fell silent, breaking off mid-sentence. That same evening, Stella's uncle was sorting through papers at his estate when his daughter suddenly came in. She was a tall, fair-haired, green-eyed girl. As soon as she entered the room, she looked very indignant. The man immediately realized that something had upset her, so he asked her what had happened. The girl said that she heard that day that the Duke of Rochester had bought 17 sets of jewelry for Stella. But that wasn't all. Her friend happened to be in the same boutique as them, and she said that she started choosing and screaming jewelry while sitting on the Duke's lap. Of course, her uncle's daughter considered this to be very annoying and did not understand who Stella thought she was. Moreover, they did not know how she managed to melt the Duke's icy heart. The only thing she could be proud of was her pretty appearance, but the girl did not know whether it really worked. After this, the daughter also told her father that there were suspicions that she was pregnant. But this was impossible. The Stella she knew was completely ignorant of men. Therefore, she would certainly never have been able to seduce the Duke in this way. Her father did not worry about it so much, so he simply decided to wait for news, since the Duke was definitely supposed to warn him about it if anything happened. Some time passed since then, and finally, the moment came when Stella's uncle and his daughter came to visit her. They pretended to be very happy to see her, but the girl was genuinely happy, because she hadn't seen her family for a long time, and seeing them was important to her. When Julia saw all these precious ornaments on the girl's neck, she realized that all those rumors were true. These gifts were probably in honor of the pregnancy. However, she believed that the girl was unworthy of even a stone. But least of all, in her opinion, she deserved the man who was holding her hand at that moment. The girls stepped aside after greeting each other and began a simple conversation among themselves. The maids who were nearby at that moment were of course discussing this whole situation, because gossiping was only a joy for them. Killian, having heard these rumors, that he was incredibly similar to Julia, was very surprised and began to look closely at her in order to understand whether it was true. When the girl saw that he was looking at her, she smiled happily. The man quickly turned away and felt awkward. He realized that they were not at all alike and assumed that there was something wrong with his servant's eyesight. While they were talking, Stella's uncle intervened in their conversation and asked to be given a tour of the estate, since he was a guest in this place and would like to see everything in more detail. Julia looked incredibly happy. She put her arms around the girl and said that first she would like to see her bedroom. She practically begged her to show her everything. Of course, Stella couldn't make this decision on her own. She turned to her husband and asked if she could do it. The guy didn't object. He said that they could do as they wished, and in the meantime, he would look after her uncle. For some reason, it seemed to him that this man was very suspicious. It seemed to him all the time that he was trying to separate him from his wife, and this was very strange. For this reason, Killian decided to find out the whole situation. He also wanted to introduce a man to the girls so that they would not chat alone. Otherwise, they could agree on something, and he did not need that. So the three of them went upstairs, and Julia began to examine the entire interior, as well as the large number of jewels. She was delighted with Stella's life and still believed that the girl did not deserve it. This role would have been better for her. However, Stella did not like such impudent behavior of her friend. So she politely tried to ask the girl not to touch the things that were given to her by the Duke. That's when Julia showed her true nature. She started yelling at her and said that she just wanted to try on the item because she didn't know when she would be able to do it again. But Stella didn't pay attention to this because the girl had become very similar to her younger sister when she was capricious and asked for more food. So she smiled and decided to let her wear it, but be sure to return it to its place. But Julia got even more angry because of this, and in a cold voice, she asked why she started laughing at all. She thought that the girl now imagined herself to be a queen, since she had acquired several trinkets. Stella, of course, was very wary when she heard these words. She was about to say something to her. However, the girl pretended that it was all a joke and told her not to take it seriously. They continued to argue, while behind them stood a maid who had been sent by the Duke to monitor everything that was happening. Of course, the girl herself was alarmed by this situation. Julia began to take various jewelry and put them all on herself. She even told Stella that it would be nice for her to move to live in this place with her. After all, she thought that it would be very nice. Stella could no longer stand this behavior. She said that it had really disappointed her that day, and therefore asked the girl to just leave on good terms. She also said that she began to doubt her uncle's humanity in general, since he raised her to be so spoiled. The girls began to argue among themselves, but Bessie replied that now she was a duchess, and they could never be as close as before. Meanwhile, the maid had to prepare a bedroom for Julia at the girl's request, and Stella herself wanted to be alone for a while, so she asked everyone to leave. Julia made an even bigger scene. She took all the jewelry and turned it right out on the floor. Of course, because they were delicate and fragile, most of them broke. Meanwhile, Killian was informed that a doctor had been called for the girl there. At first, he suspected that it was his uncle's daughter, who was acting very strange, so he immediately ran to the stand to make sure that everything was okay with her. They bandaged the hand that she was injured with. The girl looked at her husband. There was blood on her face and tears were streaming down her eyes. Stella couldn't even say a word. She was in shock. Of course, Killian was very angry at this Julia because she made his wife cry, so he believed that this girl should now seriously pay for what she did. He immediately asked about the whole situation and everything like that, and he touched the blood and asked where she got it from. Stella explained that the blood did not belong to her. It was splashes from Lady Pooh's wound, so he did not have to worry. She burst into tears because she was a little scared, and she showed the man what was wrong with her hand. Even though everything was fine, she could easily move it and function. Killian replied that he was glad that her illness had not been serious earlier, and also said that since the girl was now injured, he would like to talk to Lady Pop and find out how she was doing. In fact, Lady Pope was the same servant Stella. When she saw that she was very badly injured due to the fact that all the jewelry was spilled in different directions, she asked if everything was okay with her. She was really seriously worried about her servants. After that, she yelled at Julia and demanded an apology from her. Well, the girl, of course, did not consider it necessary. She simply left the room, saying that she needed to rest, because she didn't want to take part in any more scandals like that. When Killian came to the maid, he immediately found out from her all the details of how it happened and what plans they had, but the girl told everything as it was. Nothing suspicious happened then. Also bowing, Lady Pope said that their arguments did not at all look like a show for the public. It seemed to her that it was all real, which is why she made such conclusions. After this, the man went to his office. He kept thinking about the fact that Julia had also humiliated his wife, and he began to wonder if they had always been in such a relationship. In addition, Uncle Stella's behavior was very strange. They had a dialogue that was incredibly suspicious for the man, so now he did not understand anything at all. He didn't understand why they had to send a spy right under his nose and then so openly humiliate Stella right before his eyes. So he definitely wanted to look into this situation in more detail. He thought that it could be a trick so that he wouldn't suspect anything. But in the meantime, Stella came out to meet him. She was worried and therefore decided to check if everything was okay there, since he hadn't appeared for a long time after he left. Killian couldn't believe that there was a reason to torture this fragile woman. He thought that it was all a trick to arouse his compassion and get her hooked, so he wasn't going to fall for it. Stella explained that she came to visit him only because she thought that he was angry with her. After all, he had a very gloomy expression on his face when he left. Well, everything turned out okay. The man wasn't actually angry, he was just a little upset. And of course, seeing the wound on her hand, he couldn't help but worry, because now they were married. But Stella did not understand his worries, because it was early and completely frivolous, so she advised him to behave as usual. The man, of course, still insisted on his own. They talked for some more time and agreed that the relatives who had come to visit Stella were to blame for everything. Meanwhile, in the room that was allocated for Julia, she smashed absolutely everything there. The girl was incredibly angry, so she threw everything she could get her hands on. She was, of course, angry at Stella, who became a duchess and now believed that everything was possible. Of course, Julia was also angry that the girl believed that she had managed to do this on her own. After all, if it weren't for her father, she would certainly never have been able to achieve something like this. The girl heard some rumors about the Duke of Rochester, for example, that he served in the army for a very long time. Such a man received a wife who would warm his bed. He definitely had to appreciate her, and it wasn't that Stella Ambrose was special. In fact, any woman who seemed to be in her place could win his heart. Of course, it was unpleasant for Julia to realize this. However, it was true, so she could not do anything about it. She, after all, also appeared with the surname M. Brow, so she decided that she could at least try to share a bed with him. In order to achieve this, the girl had her own plan which she wanted to stick to. After Stella injured her arm, the man began to show even more care for her. He even decided to feed her with a spoon, thinking that she could not do it on her own. From the outside, it looked very sweet and caring, but the girl knew that it was very awkward for her, but she couldn't refuse, because then the Duke would definitely be angry with her. And while they were having a nice conversation among themselves about desserts and various meals, Julia came into their room. She turned to her little sister and asked if she could talk to her. Of course, Julia had something terrible in mind and decided to put it into practice as quickly as possible. They started arguing right in front of the Duke, and the man intervened in their conversation and said that since she was his wife's younger sister, they could speak informally. Julia was immediately happy to hear this. She thought that now she would also be somehow special. But in fact, he did this only to find out what happened. Julia immediately explained that it was all just a big misunderstanding, and they probably just got it wrong. Killian stood up from his seat, approached the girl, and said in a quiet voice that her father had a tendency to excessive anxiety and megalomania. The man realized that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, so he saw no point in blaming Julia for all the troubles. However, he advised her not to cause any more unnecessary trouble for his wife. In a quiet voice, he said something else to her. After that, he turned to his wife and said that he would go, so she could not worry and talk calmly as much as necessary. The conversation with Julia was not very pleasant. However, it did not last long because Stella did not want it. Several hours passed from that moment, and finally, it was time for dinner. The man again began to give the girl a lot of compliments, which made her very embarrassed. They had dinner with her family. The Duke openly flirted with Stella, and because of this, she giggled and her cheeks turned red. Julia, seeing their happy couple, of course grimaced. It all really irritated her, and she couldn't even hide her displeasure on her face. But fortunately, the dinner was quite prosperous. They engaged in social conversation, and the Duke inquired about the political situation around. Stella was mostly silent because she didn't want to engage in conversation, and she also ate practically nothing because she had recently had a snack. The Duke paid most of his attention to her and sometimes even ignored his guests. He also warned her not to overeat then. After all, in the evening, he would like to have a light snack with her. The girl immediately said that she didn't have such a big appetite, and besides, they had guests that day, so he didn't have to worry about it. Julia also intervened in the conversation. She said that her sister would sleep with her that day. Of course, the Duke did not like all this, so he bluntly reminded the girl that they were newlyweds. Stella's whole face turned red. She couldn't believe that a man would talk about something like that in front of a child and asked him not to do it again. Julia then decided to change the subject of the conversation and said that the Duke was probably embarrassed and asked Stella if she had really lied to the Duke about being pregnant, since various rumors about this were already circulating in society. When the girl heard something like this, she was incredibly angry and of course scolded her for what she said. But the Duke intervened in the conversation. He was very Marmot Man, sat down on the table with cutlery. Looking at Julia with an icy gaze, he said that she apologized to Lady God for what happened and wanted to close this topic. However, now she was crossing all sorts of boundaries, so he could not stay away. Julia immediately realized that she had been misunderstood. She became embarrassed and said that this was not the way he thought. Of course, she began to make excuses. After that, she pretended to cry and said that they were all disgusting to her. Now her sister had changed a lot, and it was all because of the Duke. She really behaved like a little child. Stella knew that these whims had to stop, so she said that tears in this situation would not help in any way, and asked the girl to simply apologize properly, and then everything would be fine. For some time, Julia continued to pretend to cry, But she herself did not do this and was only angry at the Stella, which thus terribly disgraced her in front of the Duke. After some time, when the girl was left alone with her father, she expressed all her dissatisfaction to him and did not understand how she had sunk to such a low level. Her father certainly agreed with Julia. However, he said that she was still a little harsh, so he advised her to watch the words she said in the future. It was then that Julia announced her insidious plan, which she wanted to carry out, namely, to take the Duke away and become the Duchess herself. Her father immediately began to protest. He told her about all the pitfalls of this plan and was not at all happy that his daughter decided to do something like this on her own. However, Julia already knew that Stella was not pregnant, and that is why she decided to do it first in order to get him. Of course, Julia didn't like the fact that she had to apologize to the servants that same evening, since she never put them on an equal footing with herself. Stella forced her to do this when the whole situation was resolved. She grabbed her sister by the hand and asked how her first wedding night went, and also asked for all the details. Stella was very shocked that the girl said something like that. She said that it was all inappropriate. Julia continued to suck up to her in order to get her way, and so that everyone would continue to consider her a little child. Julia pretended that she was about to get married soon and did everything so that Stella would feel sorry for her. That is why she asked her about all these details. Therefore, Stella told all her secrets about this wedding night, namely that it did not take place. Of course, she came up with another reason why this happened, but the fact remained the same. And Julia was incredibly happy to hear this, because it meant that her little sister was not pregnant, as the rumors said. But Julia's father was still worried. He didn't understand how she was going to pull off this whole plan, because the Duke was not a simple man after all. The girl, in turn, was very self-confident, so it certainly couldn't be difficult for her to do what she wanted, even if it concerned another person. Meanwhile, Kilena was outside in the garden and went out to smoke his cigar before going to bed. He heard footsteps behind him and turned around to see that it was the silhouette of his wife. However, after looking more closely, Killian realized that it was not his wife. It was Julia. She was wearing a wig and jewelry like her sister. He was very interested in what had happened. Of course, he immediately made it clear that he understood who she was. The girl explained that she wore this wig quite often, because in her opinion, it even suited her. Julia started to openly pester him. She said that she knew that her sister had ruined his first solid night, and that he was probably upset. She hugged him and said that her sister asked him to satisfy the Duke instead of her. That's why she came so late in the evening. However, the problem was that her room was next to Stella's room, and if she screamed too loudly, then of course she would get something like that. The Duke quickly interrupted her speech and asked if she had just called his wife a slut, and now she was saying that she was a beautiful girl who was not able to satisfy him. The man roughly removed her wig and immediately realized that she was the source of the rumor about his wife. Killian could not believe that people actually believed this wig. Julia tried to save her position. She said that her sister herself allowed all this and vice versa was only for her. But of course, no one believed it anymore. It was slander. He grabbed her by the jewelry and thereby squeezed her neck quite hard. Of course, Killian understood that all this was a lie. He said that Stella didn't know anything about it, namely that the source of the rumors about her was her beloved cousin, whom she trusted like a family member, so he asked her to answer if she didn't want her head to fly off her shoulders. Then the next morning came, and the first thing Stella did was look for her sister because she wanted to talk to her. However, in the living room, she ran into her husband, who informed her that Julia had urgently left for home the previous night. Of course, Stella was very surprised by this, because the girl did not even say goodbye. But then she decided that her sister probably really grew up after looking at all the decorations that were lying on the table. And she explained to the Duke that before the girl constantly asked to borrow jewelry and then took it home with her, but this time she left everything with her, so this was a great indicator of her maturity. Stella began to remember all their warm moments together. For example, how since childhood her cousin treated her like a mother. Stella took good care of her as a child, but since problems arose in the family, they rarely saw each other. And when they met after a long time, she realized that the girl had already grown up a lot. But at the same time, she still looked like a child because of this. Stella often felt sorry for her and let her get away with a lot. It was painful for the Duke to hear all this. He could not believe that the girl was so stupid, because she herself did not even know how her ill-mannered sister spoke about her behind her back. He grabbed his wife by the waist and pulled her onto his lap and told her not to stand there for so long. Stella, of course, became very embarrassed again. She said that he was too close. She already thought that he was going to kiss her, and because of this, her cheeks turned red. Killian certainly didn't expect to hear this. He decided to change the subject of the conversation and started talking to her about her teeth and kissed her, but only on the cheek. Even then, the man understood perfectly well what effect the girl had on him, but he could not do anything about it. Julia, who actually returned home on the very first carriage of the night, was outraged because now her father was sending her to a monastery. She did not understand why she had to endure such humiliation. However, father said that she was generally lucky to have such a fate. He told his daughter how much he had to beg the Duke because he wanted to kill her immediately. However, it was only because of Stella that she was spared. In fact, the man even pushed her away quite strongly, which caused a scratch to appear on the girl's forehead. She kept wondering how Stella was better than her. Julia didn't understand why they didn't choose her. This had never happened to her before, and because of this, she was in agony. That same day, when it was time for lunch, no one had called the girl yet, and when she pulled the bell that was supposed to call the maids, no one answered. Stella was already very hungry, and the whole situation was very strange for her, so she quickly went down to the kitchen to check what was going on there. Stella immediately asked when she could get her lunch, but the maids yelled at her, not understanding why she hadn't done it yet, since it had already passed a long time ago. The girl calmly explained the whole situation, and the maid told the girl to go upstairs and wait a bit. They would bring her something to eat. After the girl left the door, she immediately heard the maids talking. She could not believe that the maids could actually openly discuss her relationship with the Duke. For Stella, this was unacceptable and very rude. She understood that she could not be angry, because she thought that the Duke would be disappointed in her. After all, he could have said that he expected a modest duchess, but for some reason, she would have started to create problems for him. For this reason, she had to control herself. She did not want to disappoint the Duke during the term of this contract. Stella believed that since it was only one meal, she could endure it a little, since she was already accustomed to hunger. And when she passed by the lower floor to go to her room, she saw servants fussing around. She heard that guests were coming to visit them. However, when she saw their reaction, she immediately understood who exactly it was. And then, lining up in a row, all the servants, both maids and butlers, met the great Lady Rochester, who arrived on her visit. Stella, who was still standing at the top, was very surprised when she saw her. She didn't even say a word to greet her, because she simply didn't expect this. Of course, Mother Killy looked at her with a stern look and asked why she was looking at her so intently, and also whether the girl really didn't know basic manners and didn't want to go down and say hello.